Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. I'm your host, Brooke Mitchell, and today's webinar is From Farm to Fork, How Food Holds the Key to Conservation, presented by WWF's Ali Hines, Lee Prescott, SJ Shanwald, and Ann Garatska. Thank you so much for being here today, team. Ali, over to you.
Thanks so much, Brooke. And also wanted to acknowledge Earth Day. If anyone's looking for ways to celebrate today, WWF has a Give an Hour for Earth challenge if folks want to check that out. And connected to today's webinar, one of the ways to celebrate includes conducting a food waste audit. Love a moment to give a plug. But in today's webinar, like Brooke mentioned, we'll be diving into food loss and waste topics. Thankfully, we're not literally diving into them or our trash cans or compost bins. My colleagues Lee, Ann, and SJ are all on the line, and they'll discuss our work on farms, with businesses, and students. To kick us off, I'll tee us up with some general global context setting. And to do that, I'd like us to consider the findings from the 2024 Living Planet Report. Next slide. Now, if you haven't heard of the Living Planet Report, it's WWF's comprehensive study of global biodiversity trends and the status of our planet's health. It comes out every 2 years, and it's kind of like, for you parents out there, you or your kid's annual physical. Percentiles, growth charts, routine measurements that give us a better understanding of day-to-day health, and also monitoring chronic issues or symptoms. It's digestible, science-led overviews of the state of the natural world and how nature loss and climate change are pushing the planet closer to dangerous and irreversible tipping points. So yeah, the 2024 report details an average 73% decline in wildlife populations since 1970. This is alarming, especially considering we're 5 years away from meeting or not meeting crucial global goals that will have huge implications for the future of life on our planet. But, right, there's a but, it's not too late to bring our world back to life. It's going to take some big changes that you and me can be a part of, and WWF's vision for food system transformation includes global food loss and waste reductions and solutions. Okay, now we're coming to the why question. It might be cropping up into your minds. Why do we need to transform food systems? Next slide, please. We need to transform food systems because there is no other human activity that has more impact on the planet than agriculture, which we need, right? But yeah, food systems are the biggest driver of biodiversity loss and produce around a third of all greenhouse gas emissions. If we continue producing and consuming food the way we do today, we'd really need 3 planets, which we don't have, to meet the growing population's demands. Next slide. Perhaps the least controversial and most cost-effective solution we have at our disposal is reducing food loss and waste and making sure more of what we produce gets eaten and stays out of our trash. Because right now, 30 to 40% of all food produced is never eaten. The key points here really are, 1, when we waste food, we also waste all of the resources, all of the inputs that go into growing that food, and 2, reducing food waste is one of the easiest and most effective ways to reduce the global food system's environmental impact while increasing food availability without expanding ag production. Next slide. So let's zoom in nationally. If you look at the way and where of how food is grown in the United States, you get a sense of how food production fits into overall land use. We use more of our land for livestock and animal feed production than for the food we eat. We're not set up to sustainably feed humanity, and the needed transformation requires regenerative, nature positive, less wasteful solutions. I actually just saw this come out today in a partner newsletter. Each year, wasted food in the US uses 16.2 trillion gallons of water, emits over 230 million metric tons of greenhouse gases, and requires 140 million acres of farmland to grow. All of that for food that never gets eaten. Next slide. So we're gonna zoom out a smidge. Let's globally piece this together. WWF knows that transforming food systems and the change required is a complex task, especially taking in the fact that food systems are inherently local and rooted in cultural heritage. To help decision makers around the world solve this great food puzzle, WWF has categorized countries into 6 different food systems and has identified solutions with the most potential for each. Next slide. So we're thinking about the solutions now. And as we dive further into today's discussion with Lee, Anne, and SJ, let's start at the source. A few years back, WWF put out a groundbreaking study on the extent of food loss on farms called Driven to Waste. What the study did was draw attention to this often overlooked opportunity on food loss at farms. So I'm going to turn it over to Lee, who's going to talk more about our work with farmers and the opportunities to address food loss on farms. Thank you. Over to Lee.
Thanks, Allie. You can go to the next slide. That was a great overview, globally and across the US, and an introduction to this topic. And something I want to mention too, and why our whole team is here, is because we really cover the whole supply chain. So when we say the supply chain, we're talking about, as the title slide said, from farm to fork. And from farm, that's more upstream, and then you go down the supply chain. So we say downstream to the consumer or to the retailer. And so each of us on the team here at WWF US kind of cover one of those nodes in the supply chain. And so as Ali said, we're going to begin all the way to the farm, so upstream, where the food is produced. And that is the work that I've covered over the past 5 to 7 years now. And what this slide shows is a series of reports we have called No Food Left Behind that really started about 8 years ago, when we realized that the only data we had on farm level losses were based off of grower estimates. And when we went into the field to measure ourselves, we always found that loss was much greater than what growers were estimating. And that was not to the fault of the grower ever. We all know farmers are busy enough, but the way they simply viewed the food that was left behind was different than how we view it, because they're looking at it as a business opportunity. So the food that's not making it to, further downstream to the retailer or to the buyer simply wasn't lost in their eyes. But to us, when we go in and we see perfectly edible food for human consumption, that's what we were measuring as loss. So it was always really interesting, and it still to this day, it's never a waste to go into the field with a grower and actually do a measurement and compare that to what they viewed loss, because it's always different. So as Ali pointed out in that previous slide, that Global Driven to Waste report estimates that 1.2 billion tons of food is lost on farms alone. And that's during and around or after the harvest, but before it leaves the farm gate. And that's equivalent to 15.3% of food produced, which is about 2.2 gigatons CO2 equivalent for that for that food before it leaves the farm gate, which is about 16% of all greenhouse gas emissions in the agricultural food production supply chain. And then that also scales to about 4.4 million kilometers squared of land, which is used to grow food that only becomes loss. So these are pretty significant numbers. And then in the US, I know that it just changed recently that that farm loss surpassed retail level loss, which is something my colleague Anne will touch on later. So there's a lot of loss happening on farms. And again, these reports, we have a handful now, 5, 6, 7 reports that look at different crop types, different fruits and vegetables, and then also compare crops that are sent downstream just as fresh product versus being processed into canned food and different product types. Next slide. So something we've been working on the past couple of years as we've gone out of this measurement phase is trying to equip growers with the tools they need to understand these loss numbers and the resources they need to be able to communicate with buyers around these loss opportunities and how they can be beginning to use those surpluses. So last spring, we launched the Global Farm Loss Tool, which is a tool for growers to go into the field, harvest everything that's left behind, and categorize that loss into 3 categories. Data can be viewed by the buyers or food service companies so that that open line of communication is established between the grower and that buyer to figure out how to utilize that surplus and find solutions that prevent the loss from even happening in the first place. So examples of surplus channels could include produce for value-added processing. Maybe we've seen products in the grocery store that say ugly produce. That'd be like a value-added type of processing. Other solutions could be retail brands that have their own label using product that's left behind in the fields for that brand, maybe for jams or frozen items. Also, sometimes something that's been popular in European stores is markdowns for blemished products and finding that kind of tiered pricing model. I have not seen that in major retail stores in the US yet, but that's also a great solution. And then maybe it's making a whole new fresh marketable product. So I know we've worked with companies who have started to target small strawberries as gems because they found that there were so many strawberries being left behind in the field just because they were too small. So it's really about getting that data coming in. We like to say what gets measured gets managed, and having that open line of communication with the buyer so that we can find channels for this surplus. Next slide. So this is a great photo of us in the field. So that's a partner, believe it or not, in the field after a harvest with romaine lettuce. So going into the field, categorizing it into what is marketable, meaning it was just left behind, but is still perfectly good for the end user or their retail buyer. And then what is edible, so something that's still perfectly good for human consumption, but did not meet cosmetic specs for that buyer. So maybe it was too big or too small, or it was blemished. And then the last category is spoiled, so inedible. And again, we really focus on the marketable and edible categories. When focusing on the marketable, that's usually a prevention strategy. So it's maybe they realized, oh, that was something going on with our labor crews, or like, why was that missed? We need to go walk into our rows and figure out why that was missed. It shouldn't have been missed. Versus the edible category is like, okay, like what can we be doing? How can we get this product out of the fields? How can we make sure it's still being used? For retailers who are focused on this and their various sustainability commitments, this is what they're really interested in. And so that top picture shows romaine and the bottom picture shows strawberries. So you can see, in that edible category, something that I'm sure you're looking at thinking, well, I would eat that. And then, the spoiled is something that, you probably wouldn't eat, but there's probably still good use for it, whether it's some type of anaerobic digestion or animal feed or just compost. So that's still a category that we're looking at. Next slide. So we really like this quote, when you find waste, it's good for business. It brings new opportunities for innovation and profit, again, for really everyone along the supply chain. So I wanted to find a picture of a couple of those examples I mentioned earlier of the gem strawberries being used. Also, we have had success in getting product used for getting turned into frozen and also juiced further through the supply chain. So these are just a few examples that I wanted to show. And then we're also working with companies that are manufacturers and who maybe have, pureed fruit products in their final product. So again, why are we going to farms and using perfect product and not using the product that is less ideal, blemished, too big, too small, and getting that processed and added into a product? So these are a few of the ways we are working with companies. which is a perfect point for me to hand it over to my colleague Anne, who is working further down the supply chain with retailers and buyers via the U.S. Food Waste Pact. So with that, I will hand it over to Anne.
Great. Thank you, Lee. Yeah, Lee has definitely, we're just continuing down that supply chain from the primary production at the farm to the point where it's now in the hands of organizations who are making the products that you buy in the retail store. So your canned peaches, your bags of flour, to the companies who use that to then make your meals, whether it's a prepared food at a retail establishment or a food you have at a restaurant. So what both the Pacific Coast Food Waste Commitment does, as well as the U.S. Food Waste Pact, is we bring these food businesses together to collaborate and to work together. You can imagine it's oftentimes hard because they're competing for your dollar. They want you to come into their store to buy that can of peaches from grocery store A versus grocery store B. But when it comes to food loss and waste, they share many of the similar challenges and can learn from one another. So these two organizations, the Pacific Coast Food Waste Commitment on the West Coast, bringing together the states of Oregon, Washington, and California, and then the U.S. Food Waste Pact nationally, bring these companies together to talk about how they can start to solve these problems. It might mean solving the problems internally within their organization. So looking at their production processes or their operating procedures for how they organize that shelf of oranges, or how they manage the food that comes in and goes out of the store. But they come together to talk about this on a pre-competitive format. We lead this through working groups, through sector summits, where we bring together topical groups to work on different areas, or we bring together peers in a sector so that they can share from people who really deal with the same types of problems. And then we take this a little bit further into some problem solving, working in areas like Lee talked about, where we bring together companies to work on a commodity like strawberries to try to troubleshoot and brainstorm and problem solve. So we work together. This is a systems problem, which requires a system solutions. And these two initiatives definitely speak to that. Going on to the next slide, I'm the conductor, so I will take us to that. This is a long-standing effort for both of these initiatives. The Pacific Coast Food Waste Commitment started in 2018 here on the West Coast, where I just happen to be located. And the states of Washington, Oregon, and California kind of raised their hands and said, we want to take a lead in this area. We want to be groundbreakers and bringing solutions and conversations to the table. And so they broke ground in 2018. And by 2022 had really started to set a tone by producing case studies based on intervention pilots they ran in the areas of food loss and waste, working with companies to look at their operations, to look at their value chains and say, how can we start to make changes that can really bring progress. And so that was in the fall of 2022. That work has continued and was successful enough to prompt the launching of the U.S. Food Waste Pact, which is national. So we are now have an initiative that spans the entire country and is starting to work across all states and all sectors to really bring the solutions more globally across the country, or nationally across the country. And some of the data that Lee and Allie have referred to in terms of greenhouse gas impact, food loss and waste impact as well, is covered in a very recent report published by the U.S. Food Waste Pact called Big Progress in Reducing Retail Food Waste that came out just this April. So that's something, if you want to dig into the bin, if you will, these documents really go into some of the actions that have been taken. And I want to move on to how we support these businesses because they're learning alongside us. We produce and publish publicly reports that cover some of the areas where we're working and the solutions we're driving, so that not only do these participating food businesses have the opportunity to learn and grow, we want all food businesses to have the opportunity to learn and grow. So just because we work with one retailer, it doesn't mean we limit the learnings to just that one retailer. We really are about raising all boats here and not just one. So these are some of the areas where we've worked. We've worked in whole chain, which is working across the supply chain. We've worked with companies with their employees. How can an employee who was looking at fresh produce on a day-to-day basis. How can we help them be part of the solution? And then providing resources and reports to help educate and guide planning on the part of these food businesses. And then finally, we have started a new initiative in this recent year, really focusing on hospitality. I'm sure everybody on the call has been to a conference, to a wedding, to a fancy birthday party, maybe a business meeting. These are high waste type events. And so we're working to design solutions to help reduce the waste at these historically high waste events, to make them low waste events. Quite often, these are very simple solutions, but it takes education and awareness. And so we're driving that by working again with food businesses in the hospitality sector. And so with that, talking about eating food at a table, I'm going to pass you over to SJ, who's going to talk about students and what's going on with helping students and their consumption of food in schools. So over to you, SJ.
Thank you so much, Anne. Hi, everyone. I'm SJ. I'm a program officer here at World Wildlife Fund, and I'm really excited to talk a little bit about the Food Waste Warriors program. And do you mind advancing the slide on this? I wonder if we have. There we go. Perfect. One of the programs we haven't yet talked about is called Food Waste Warriors. This program was established back in 2018 to engage with K through 12 schools all across the nation. And the goal essentially is to turn our cafeteria into classrooms, into places where students can really learn about the importance of reducing their food waste and the impacts that food waste has on the environment, as well as trying to instill some sustainable behaviors as well. Schools waste a ton of food. If you were to do an audit at your local school, you'd probably find that in the waste stream, that the school probably wastes over 50% of what the school wastes is categorized as food. In fact, in the US alone, it's estimated schools throw away more than 530,000 tons each year, which is equivalent to 1.9 billion meals annually. And when we talk about this waste, as my colleagues here have mentioned, it's not only that we're talking about wasted food, but also wasted energy, wasted labor, and wasted water, all of those things, all of those resources going to waste. And, because this issue affects our environment, our communities, even budgets, that's exactly why Food Waste Warriors program is really so critical. Anne, can you advance the slide? Cool. So this slide gives a general kind of overview of what the program kind of consists of. At its core, it's designed to tackle food waste with kind of three pillars: food waste education, school systems changes, as well as student engagement. So first, when we talk about education, we've put a lot of effort into our educational curriculum. We tried to create these open source materials based around scientific standards across the nation to be able to provide teachers with tools and lesson plans for schools so that the students can really connect the dots between what's on their tray and what ends up in the trash. The second thing is school systems changes, and this is really one of the most important things that we do. Is we help to help schools identify ways that they can reduce their own food waste, or recover edible food, or divert the food that can't be eaten into composting or other alternatives. And this is really all about kind of building systems that are sustainable, that last beyond one single school year, and working with local organizations to make all of this happen, whether that's municipalities or nonprofit organizations or other kind of environmental organizations, all to build this regional momentum and to make some tailored changes to schools and their districts. So sometimes the school system changes. It looks like us working with community composters to divert organic waste. And sometimes it looks like funding share tables in schools or share refrigerators so that after school programs can take advantage of the surplus recoverable breakfasts and lunches at their school. And then the last thing that we touch on in our program is student engagement. And so because young people we recognize are incredibly powerful advocates and legislators love hearing from students. We support hands-on projects, leadership opportunities, and youth-driven campaigns ultimately to empower students to make changes within their schools and also within their communities kind of as a whole. Next slide, please. Cool. So I've talked a little bit about what we do, but what's our reach? And is this really catching on? The cool thing about this program, I feel like, is the way that it can be tailored to different communities. We are currently in 600 schools in 31 different states across the country, in urban districts as well as in rural districts, and in some places the focus might be on education and awareness. And others, it might be about implementing composting systems based on new organic waste bans that the state is implementing, or encouraging communications campaigns within the school to reduce their food waste. So to address the sustainable change, again, we really try to garner community support and engagement when making these changes. We know that schools, it's a great place to really instill behavior change, but it's also a challenging place to really get wheels on the ground, just because there's a lot of turnover within schools, and there's also a ton of unions and different things that we kind of like see as obstacles, but they're really like also great opportunities to try to make these programs as robust as possible so that they can be tailored to different schools within the district and also different schools within different districts as well. So we're really trying to come up with programs that can be sustained long term. Next slide, please. One of the pillars, of course, is student engagement, and we've come a long way in terms of the way that we are able to engage with students and look at the big picture, which is kind of like policy change in general. As a nonprofit organization, we don't necessarily like lobby for certain state bills, but we do provide advocacy tools to students should they want to be more involved in learning how policy gets passed and about the legislation process in general. The pictures that you see here on this slide is based on a case study from Maryland students. They actually wrote handwritten letters and postcards to their legislators asking and telling their legislators that they're really interested in more composting infrastructure. And they actually ended up getting a bill passed. Essentially it was to give like hundreds of thousands of dollars to schools within Maryland that are interested in improving their composting infrastructure, whether that be working with an external composter to compost their food scraps from lunch, or whether that be implementing a backyard composting kind of facility that the students would run, or a student eco club, for example, would run. So that's a really cool aspect of, I think, of the program, is that we're really trying to make system changes small and large, and this was a great example of students really getting involved. And aside from the awesome work that our students do, we are also affiliated with the Zero Food Waste Coalition. And this is a coalition that kind of brings together organizations and groups that are working on national level solutions as well as state level solutions. And we have a bunch of members from municipalities to nonprofits, food banks, educational centers, even corporate partners. It's just a great way for us to be able to make these big and small changes and learn more about food waste legislation within their states and how they can really get involved with people that are interested in similar work. And so we advocate for standardized date labels across the nation, for robust school food recovery efforts. And then we equip members also with tools that they need to get involved in some grassroots organizing as well. Next slide, please, Ann. Cool. And so to wrap up, food waste in schools is a major issue, but it's also a great opportunity. And through education, through systems change, and through that student engagement piece, the Food Waste Warriors program turns cafeterias into classrooms that are really focused on sustainability, focused on advocacy, as well as innovation. And I'm happy to talk more about that as well. I assume afterwards you can probably find my information, but it's also here, sj.shanwald@wwfus.org, if you're interested in learning anything more about Food Waste Warriors and the work that we do. And next slide, please, Ann. And then just wanted to thank you. Thank you for spending some time with us here on this Earth Day. Just to reiterate, our team really focused on sustainability from field to fork and emphasizes sustainable practices that can reduce food waste and also support kind of like an ecological balance. And we also incorporate that into education, into employee engagement, into farmer engagement, all of that. And we, again, are really appreciative for you hanging out with us today. And we look forward to hearing any questions that you have. I'm going to turn it back over to Brooke and see if we have any questions coming in.
Oh, fantastic, team. That was so good. I know I learned so much, and I'm sure that everybody who has tuned in today has as well. Everybody, we have some time here with our presenters. In your control panel, there's a little questions box. Go ahead and put some in there, and we'll just get through a few and see what more we can learn after that great presentation. Great here. Okay, so let's see. We have some coming in. So this is also the first time I heard about this, and I would love to learn more, and I'm sure others would as well. The U.S. Food Waste Pact. I never heard of this, and some people dropping in comments also, like, this is a first for us. Could you talk a little bit further about it? Like, what did it do? How was it passed? Any other information? That would be great.
Sure, I'm happy to take that question and do my best to answer it. So, the concept of a pact, I hope folks are familiar with, but I'll start with that. So, pacts are typically a sort of super organization, if you will, that is supported by any number of organizations underneath it that come together around a single objective. Historically, here in the US, we've had pacts focused on plastics. We've had pacts focused in other industries on needs and opportunities. In this case, the PCFWC, which was a West Coast focused organization, set the groundwork for the opportunity for the U.S. a national program to come into place. So WWF, which is the organization all four of us are part of, partnered with another organization called ReFed, which is another food loss and waste organization focused very much on data and data analysis in the food waste sector. The two organizations, WWF and ReFed, came together to establish the U.S. Food Waste Pact to provide an infrastructure for conversation, for dialogue, and for solutions that would support food businesses in reducing food loss and waste. So we've picked targets, ways of measurement, and ways of acting that are all guided toward reducing food loss and waste, primarily in the business sector, of the supply chain. And we are a year old, or just over a year old, and we were established in December of 2023. So last year, 2024, was the first year we were fully active, which is why many of you are probably like, never heard of you. That's because we're babies. We're a baby organization, but we have history and partnership coming out of the Pacific Coast Food Waste Commitment, which means we already had some legs on the ground and some foundation to build off of. This type of organization also exists in other countries. So for anybody on the call who either works or lives abroad, we have sister organizations in South Africa, the United Kingdom, Mexico, New Zealand, Australia, and some others coming online in some other countries. So we are not alone in doing this, but we are somewhat new here in the US in terms of doing this. So I hope that answered the question fully enough for whoever asked.
Yeah, no, that was great. Thank you so much, Anne, for that elaboration. All right, let's keep going down. So then how does WWF or your team, how do you engage with these businesses to help reduce their waste? Do you approach them? Do they or do they approach you? Like how receptive are new businesses to doing these like more innovative things? Yeah, like that would be great to learn more about.
Lee, do you want to start and answer that question from the farm? And then I can take it as it gets further downstream.
Sure. I think it's interesting as Anne explained that, the pact and us doing these packs in the US is generally new. I think for us with at the farm level, which are businesses and companies, I mean, we've been working with farms 7, 8 years now. So when I look back in the beginning, it was very opportunistic. Working with growers is very different. They're very busy. They're working around the clock. They work with the weather. When things are in go with harvest and planting season, like there's no weekends. So we had to be very careful with how we work with growers and really present this as an opportunity to, show the amazing work they're doing and say that we were going to help to, get this surplus out of the fields and connect them with interested buyers and retailers. So in the beginning, it was really utilizing the relationships we already had. And since then, it's kind of grown. But as one of the slides showed, showing that business opportunity and that this is profitable for both retailers and buyers and the grower, that's what keeps the attention, coming. And, farmers don't want to see waste in their fields. Like this isn't something that they are okay with. They considered it the cost of doing business. So trying to, convince them that it does not have to be the cost of doing business and they can be making a lot more with what they're already using to grow that food is generally, how we kind of start these conversations. But we do have to be very opportunistic with how we work with growers. And I know that can be a bit different maybe with how the pact engages with companies, but yeah, I'll hand it over to Anne.
Yeah, I would say not too different. We definitely look for organizations that have on their own initiative identified this a priority for them. So organizations who have said, we as a company want to reduce food loss and waste within our operations and our supply chain. So looking for that natural affinity is a opportunistic starting point. But then we just continually have conversations in different forums, asking for different introductions to try to find those that are aligned to this way of changing their way of doing business, this way of addressing the environmental balance that SJ talked about. So it is somewhat opportunistic, but we also try to provide education to help those who might not see it to look at things a little bit differently. So it would not be uncommon to talk to a company who has prioritized plastics reduction. Like we want to just use less materials when we bag up that flour, we bag up that cereal, but that also has a food loss and waste opportunity there as they're thinking about how they package things up. So we'll lean into those opportunities to help educate and raise awareness about like a double opportunity, not just materials in terms of production, but the food you could better utilize in that same production. So I think the theme is opportunistically, but also proactively looking for those conversations where we can find them. Back to you, Brooke.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, that was great. Yeah, all the connections. It's, one piece of the puzzle. Oh, how do we reduce our plastic usage? But actually, yeah, there's more ways to optimize. So No, this is really interesting. Yeah. This has been great to listen and learn from you all. Great. So we have another question here asking about the food waste reduction in schools. So maybe SJ, this might be best for you. So could you elaborate a little bit on the connection between when there is the food waste reduction in schools, that there seems to be a connection with improved test scores? Could you elaborate a little bit further on that?
Sure. This all has to do really with getting students engaged. We really find that this program is really wrapped up into getting students to forge their own path within the Food Waste Warriors kind of curriculum and programming that we offer. And we really find that students are excelling more, are getting more engaged when they're doing something and doing a project that they really feel like they have a input in and a stake in. And a lot of the programs that are very successful are mostly student led and student driven. And we really try to bring a design thinking kind of approach to how do we create a school system that is ultimately sustainable. So, it's all really through that student engagement piece and also through our curriculum. A lot of times, food systems isn't really necessarily on the forefront of curriculum within the science realm. And so we really try to drive that home that, looking at the food system in general is just a really great way to understand some of the concepts of like circular supply chain and just like how energy transfers through nature. All of that kind of stuff can really be brought back to that understanding and learning about the food system. So those are some key ways that we've really found students kind of really engaging well with and responding really well to the sort of things that we are implementing within schools.
Oh, awesome. Yes, thanks for that further information. Great. Yeah, and the person who asked, they're like, yes, thank you. That's awesome. Okay, let's keep going through here. Lots of great questions. So this is actually going back to the growers. What is the average size of some of these growers? Are like the mega corporate ones, are they also engaging with WWF to become more efficient and less food waste and everything?
Yes, that's a great question. So we mostly work with your larger growers. So suppliers of Driscoll's, I'm just going to name some labels you might know, Braga Fresh, Cal Giant, like yes, and who are all distributors, by the way. So when you see those names, those are actually mostly distributors, and under them will be many more farmers or suppliers. And we are trying to work still with smaller producers, more so because they usually have less losses. So how can we look at those learnings and figure out how to scale that across larger acreage? But from WWF's standpoint, right, we're really trying to make an impact. So we need to work with the larger players, right? It's how do we focus with these larger producers on making sure that their operations are more resilient and regenerative and sustainable, and that includes the focus on food loss. So yes, when we're talking about these loss numbers on farms, the 16%, it's with the large players, and so that's where we need to be focusing our efforts.
Yeah, that makes sense. The biggest bang for your buck, essentially, on your day-to-day work here. Yes, completely understandable. But on the exact flip side of that, a lot of us on this call, we are personally invested in this and also want to reduce our food waste. So what are some of the best tips that we could do? Whether that's maybe special composting tips. I even have a few questions in here about like composting things. What if composting isn't available in our district? Like, yeah, just any tips and tricks for us. How could we help reduce our food waste and be a part of the solution?
That's always a fun one for our team, and I feel like we're all going to want to add. So we'll just go around the whole circle, and maybe I can even try to focus more on like what we can do as consumers to help with reducing loss at the farm level. And then maybe Ali and SJ touch more on like the consumer end and what you could be doing at home, because there's endless things there. So, but you know, we do have an effect on what is happening on farms. And I think it really does go a long way to say, you know, like voting with your dollar type of thing, like putting your dollar in the right place, because there are growers who are working really hard to do better. And all farmers are working hard, but they're so stretched thin. And, you know, there's growers that are just going an extra mile and trying to figure out how to, you know, be more resilient, bring in regenerative practices, limit losses, just doing things like that. And so, you know, I know that the world of labels is so confusing, but as, you know, educated consumers, you know, we're very lucky and privileged to maybe have the time to get to look up some of those brands, and it's always worth it. I know as a shopper, and I'm always trying to figure out how to support growers, regional growers, if I'm shopping at the grocery store, it's like when you find those brands, at least you know you can always buy them. I'm like, okay, like I know this is a good brand. So I'm like, that's what I always buy now, you know? So like doing that research it's not a waste of time. You don't have to do it all the time when you shop, but just kind of really trying to understand where your food is coming from so that you can spend your money in the right place goes a long way. So I'll hand it over to someone else on my team, maybe Anne.
Yeah, I think I focus a little bit less at the consumer side, but I think the same idea of what Lee just said applies. And we've seen this through some of the employee engagement programs that we've piloted with our food businesses, where the leadership level realizes the folks who are on the grocery store floor or in the manufacturing floor, they see the waste, and by giving them both the responsibility and opportunity to speak up and the space to speak up, they're finding ways to reduce the waste that's happening in the grocery store or in the manufacturing facility, so that either it doesn't get wasted, or when it doesn't end up where it's meant to, it at least does not end up in landfill. It ends up in a food donation program, or it ends up in a place that doesn't have a negative consequence. So giving the opportunity for workers who see the waste day to day to raise their hand and make a decision to raise their voice is another way that it's helping to address that. Not at home, but in the workplace in a very similar way about speaking up. Not with your dollar, but just with your voice. But I guess I'll pass it over to SJ. Maybe you've got some insights from teaching our kids.
Sure. Yeah, this is a great question, and you know, of course, something that we're kind of thinking about day to day. I found it really interesting, the question about, you know, what happens if there's not composting available at my district, and that's the case for a lot of districts around the country, even though we would like to think that it is otherwise. And you know, my my slide about those Maryland students being able to in impact legislation is a really cool example, but obviously it's like it's hard to do if you know you're just on your own, one student. You know, you need kind of a coalition to kind of gather around, and so I think, like, you know, policy is one thing, but also starting small at your school. You know, does your school have a share table? You know, is there offer versus serve being implemented, which is kind of a concept that allows lunch cafeteria managers to be able to give students their reimbursable meal without having to take all 5 components of the school meal. So, you know, is your school participating in that kind of thing? Those are small little ways that your school can get involved. And, you know, even if you don't have composting, that's totally fine. We like to focus on that food recovery piece first anyways. So, you know, if there's edible, recoverable food, share tables are a great way to go. Partnering with a food bank or a food pantry or an after school program that could use that food. Those are also great first steps to see how you can get engaged within the school space. I'll pass it over to Allie to also add on.
Thanks so much, guys, for thinking of some of those solutions. And I think the end of the day, there's so much going on in the world, so much issue, so much messaging to really digest. And I think for me, it's taking a step back and breathing and understanding that it's a problem for all of us and what can I do as part of that. And for me personally, it's the education piece. Like SJ mentioned too, kind of the way that we filter the thinking is prevention, recovery, and then diversion. And so is there a box I can tick in one of those categories? Is there something I want to focus on? And then in the consumer space in 2022, WWF had a global consumer campaign called Save One Third. You can Google it. And it offers solutions about how to shop smarter, cook smarter, eat smarter. So things that you can really implement in your own kitchen and live by. So I think it is just surveying, making a plan for how you want make a difference and know that there are organizations and ways to get involved around you too. Thanks, Brooke.
Well, fantastic. Those were all great insights and tips. And it looks like we've gone through most of the questions here. So, team, I would love to turn it to you for any last closing comments.
I'll go ahead and start. I think this is just a great one to actually end on, was this question, because we know food loss and waste can be a confusing space, and we have a ton of great resources on our website. So please check it out. And I think we are all listed there. We love just getting questions. You're always welcome to email us. And, like Ali said, just focusing on something from your home or like how you do your purchases makes such a big impact. And of course, like talking about it with friends and family. So we'll leave you with that. I think that's always just a great way to spread the word.
I think I'd like to dovetail on
Wonderful.
what Ali said is there's so much that you could do, and sometimes simply just finding the one thing that fits your family, your lifestyle, your workplace, and starting there. And that could just be shopping smarter. It could be freezing those vegetable peelings to make stock later because you're a home cooker. But just getting started on a food loss and waste journey is, like many things, half the battle. So just get started.
Great. If those were last comments, then that is fantastic. I'm getting a lot of thank yous in the questions field here. So, and I also want to thank all four of you for coming on and talking with us. I had a fantastic day. What a great Earth Day. Thank you all so much for taking the time. And I would like to thank everybody who tuned in. Join us tomorrow for our next daily dose of nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.